You're listening to Superflexology, a Superflex-focused fantasy football podcast with your hosts John Bauer and Mitch Sorensen.
Welcome to episode 26 of the Superflexology Fantasy Football Show, a proud member of the Full-Time Fantasy Network. I'm your host, John Bauer. You can find me on Twitter at The Bauer Club. Of course, I am joined by Mitch Sorensen. That's at DinoMC on Twitter. Mitch, it's been a while. We took a few weeks off. Life came at us fast as it usually does. We're almost 1/3 of the way through with the 2019 fantasy football season. And tonight we really want to throw our dynasty hats back on. 5 weeks in. At this point, we should be able to look at our teams and figure out whether we're a contender or a pretender.
Yeah, definitely. And something to keep in mind, there's very few leagues that don't have a trade deadline. But the trade deadline in most of the leagues that I'm in is the week before Thanksgiving. So that's only 6 weeks away at this point. So you should have a pretty good idea on what to do because, sometimes it takes a couple of weeks to get a trade done.
So right before Thanksgiving, that is something I'm not thankful for. I hate trade deadlines.
And me too. Yeah, I hate them too.
So what are things that you're looking at when you're deciding whether you're a contender, pretender, if you think you should begin your rebuild process, or if you're making a push for the playoffs and a potential championship?
Yeah, so some of them are pretty self-explanatory. You can look at your team and you just know that you're pretty good. But on teams right now that are 3-2, 2-3, 1-4, I only play on my fantasy league. So you could go to the report, then standings, and then the power rank. And that actually gives you all the information you pretty much need. It has your all play on there. It has your points for, points against, and potential points. And so I go through that with every one of those teams. And I mainly look at points for and potential points. I might just be doing a really bad job in certain leagues of starting the wrong players. And if I have a really high amount of potential points, which is potential points for anyone out there that doesn't know, it just means that they kind of make your best lineup for the week. And that's how many points you would have scored if you would have played that lineup. So you can look at that and you can know pretty quick if you have a high potential points, then you have a lot of points between your starting lineup and your bench. But if you have really low points for and low potential points, you know that your team's either just really overperforming or it's just going to be a rebuild in the first place.
I think one of the worst things that we can do as a dynasty fantasy football player is being okay with mediocrity. And for me, I either want to make sure I'm making a push for the playoffs or I want to start that rebuild. And I'm already looking ahead to the next year. And of course, there's some exceptions and you should be able to look at your team and figure that out. For example, if you're sitting there with Saquon Barkley, Tyreek Hill, even a Travis Kelce, Joe Mixon, that looked really great on paper coming into the season. But we're here after week 5, that's probably not looking too good. Mitch, what we're going to do tonight, we're going to run through a few players and spend some time on these guys that you're looking to acquire if you're a contender and whether or not you're willing to pay the price from a few actual trades that took place. So we went in, we found some trades that really went through and, I want to see your thoughts on that. So who's a player that as a contender, you would be okay buying right now?
So right now, I think you're probably going to hear this name a lot. And all these guys that we mentioned, these are players that we are willing to go out and buy or that we will be willing to go out and sell if we're a contender. And so these just aren't guys, that we're just pulling up because they're old or something like that. But my first player is going to be Larry Fitzgerald. We know that Cardinals offense loves to throw the ball. They're, I think, second in the league right now in pass to run ratio. And Larry Fitzgerald gives you 10 points every week. You're going to get 5 receptions, 50 yards, and then you're also going to get some of those boom weeks where he gets you a touchdown and 100 yards. And so you're getting 20 points that way. And I think the big thing is when you already are a contender, you already have a pretty good core of players. So you're not really going to go out and buy Christian McCaffrey at this point. You're going to go out and try to find players that could fill the holes in your lineup.
And that's a great point. And you know me very well. During the offseason, and you're this way a little bit, I'm all about the blockbuster. I want a jaw-dropping trade that's going to go through and shock the league. And you brought up like a Christian McCaffrey. That's a player that I'm very comfortable buying during the offseason. Again, shake things up and see how it pans out. But at this point in the season, you're looking at your roster and you see what holes have to be filled. And Larry Fitzgerald very well could do that. So that's a great point. You're looking to acquire these smaller pieces, and you're going to see here in a second the trades that actually went through. So Mitch, we have 6 different deals here that involved Larry Fitzgerald, and I'm going to work my way down. So the cheapest being the first, and let me know if any of these hits your threshold where you're not willing to buy. All right. So first up, 2023 for Larry Fitzgerald.
Oh, I'd do that.
So you're doing that one. 2 2023s for Larry Fitzgerald.
Yes.
LaShawn McCoy for Larry Fitzgerald and a 2023.
Yes.
And that one I could kind of see if maybe you need a running back or wide receiver.
Yeah, it's definitely team dependent on that one.
Right. Now, this one might get a little tricky because I know that you like this guy, or at least a few weeks ago you did. Preston Williams for Larry Fitzgerald as a contender.
Oh, yeah. I think that's a perfect example of a trade to make. One that's going to help the rebuild team and one that's going to help the contender.
Exactly. When I saw that one, and they're all within the last week. So that one I saw, and I thought that was a really good one. Again, we don't know the team makeups, but I'm assuming one is a contender, one's a rebuild. 2022 for Larry Fitzgerald.
If I was pretty sure that I had a dominant team, yeah, I'd do it.
And again, in this situation, if you're a contender, that's probably going to be a later 2022. So it could make sense there. And the last one, Deion Kane plus 2022 for Larry Fitzgerald.
That one's tough because I do like Kane. I would probably go with the Kane in 2022 side.
Okay, so that actually worked out really well. We got to the last one, and finally, that was kind of your threshold. I think a 2022 for Larry Fitzgerald is very fair. It's very reasonable. We're going to talk about this throughout the rest of the show. But if you were sitting there, I know we're looking at this from a contender perspective. If you are not a contender and you go into the offseason with some of these players, shame on you. You know, you need to be shopping these guys. And Larry Fitzgerald is a perfect example of a guy that if you're not a contender, he should not be on your roster at the conclusion of the 2019 season. Next up, I'm just going to throw him at you. It's a guy that I liked in the offseason. I probably overpaid at the time, but Jordan Howard, I know he's on your list. What are your thoughts on Jordan Howard?
Jordan Howard's just getting the touches in the Eagles offense, and that's the reason why I want to buy him. The Eagles are top 5 in DVOA as far as offense goes. He has 10 red zone touches in the past 2 weeks. Everyone knows that Miles Sanders is going to take over that backfield at some point, but I don't count on it being this year anymore. I think they're just going to split touches anyways, but as long as Jordan Howard is getting most of those red zone touches, I want him in that lineup because I've been saying it since, May. I absolutely love that Eagles offense. And if I could get Jordan Howard and, he's just going to be a flex play for me and I could play him 4 to 5 times throughout the year, I think he's someone really good to go after right now.
It's actually crazy to think about because, again, in Chicago, he was a declining asset, and then he moved to Philadelphia. There were some that saw his value as increasing against what we expected in Chicago, but then many saw it kind of being similar because, okay, running back by committee situation, but we've actually seen a really solid floor from Jordan Howard, and I think that's been a pleasant surprise, as well as kind of a high ceiling. He had a 30-point fantasy game. I'm not expecting 3 touchdowns from Jordan Howard every single week, and neither should you, the listener. But one thing to mention before we get into the trades that went through, Jordan Howard, he's a free agent after this year. I know we all want to put a situation, we all want to pick Tampa Bay for all these guys to go to, but there are some decent situations that he could find himself in next year that if you're able to buy him, especially at some of the prices you're going to hear about here in a second, that could be not just a win now piece, but he's only 24, 25 years old?
Yeah, he's really young, and that's a great point. Even the ones that you don't think about. What if he went to Seattle? And
Whoa, you bite your tongue there.
One of those backs is going to move at some point, but say San Francisco, just any team like that has a pretty good run game. Jordan Howard's going to stay in this league for a few years at least.
Right, or a situation where he is a backup, and we know with running backs, with anybody in the NFL, there are injuries, and he could easily be plugged into that starting role. But you had him on the list, and I think this is a really nice buy as a contender. So let me throw some of these situations, some of these, again, actual trades that went through. And the first 2 I kind of laughed at, but first one, a 2021 4th plus, now here's the big kicker, a 2021 5th. For Jordan Howard. Are you doing that one, Mitch?
I would do that on any team. I don't care what it is. I'd be doing that trade.
It would take a lot less than Jordan Howard for me to make that trade. Next up, Trenton Cannon from the New York Jets, a dominant running back, plus a 2023 for Jordan Howard.
So these are real trades, right?
These are actual trades that went through. And it's funny because, you talk about guys that are buy lows or talk about guys that we should be looking to acquire. And sometimes people will say, oh, offer a 2024th, it might get done. But these are actual trades that went through. So yes, Trent Cannon plus a 2023rd for Jordan Howard.
Jordan Howard.
All right. Doug Martin plus a 2022nd for Jordan Howard.
Jordan Howard.
Now, this one, again, it worked out well with Larry Fitzgerald, the last one, but 2021 first for Jordan Howard.
No, 2021 first.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not willing to give up a first for running back by committee back.
Now, if you're one running back away or you're looking for, let's say you're one running back away in a league here, would you do a 2020 second plus a 2021 second?
It would have to be someone better than Jordan Howard. I would want... I can't pull anyone off the top of my head, but maybe Devontae Freeman, someone like that. I would just want someone that's a little bit more locked in if I'm giving up 2 second-round picks for him.
No, that's really fair. So essentially, your threshold is 1 second for Jordan Howard.
Yeah.
In your league, if a team that is 1-4, 0-5, even 2-3, but really low in total points, that is going to be a really good target. I think Jordan Howard for a 2022nd, really fair trade. And again, a situation that is beneficial to both sides. Mitch, who's another guy that you have?
Carlos Hyde. He's pretty much in the same situation as Jordan Howard is. He's in a really good offense, but the difference with Carlos Hyde is he's actually getting a lot more touches than Howard. He's averaging about 15 touches each game. The main thing about Carlos Hyde, though, is he's not going to give you 100 yards and a touchdown. And so this guy, Carlos Hyde's going to be a little bit cheaper than I think what Jordan Howard's going to be. But Carlos Hyde's going to be a great flex play come week 9, week 10, week 11, when we get all those big bye weeks. And I've actually started him in a few leagues already. They're ones where I get 0.25 points per carry, but he's carried me to a couple wins so far.
I think it's a really great comparison, Jordan Howard to Carlos Hyde, somewhat similar situations, running back by committees, offenses where you're going to get goal line work. And Carlos Hyde, I think he's another good one that we should be looking to buy as a contender. So I have 3 situations here, 3 actual trades. Now, this one, it was a few days ago, but it still kind of blows my mind that it went through. Wayne Gallman for Carlos Hyde.
No, I'd rather have Carlos Hyde.
Okay. And I think, and I completely agree, I think that was the 4th or 5th of October. So it really wasn't that long ago. The next one, a 2023rd or Carlos Hyde?
Carlos Hyde.
And then Jalen Samuels for Carlos Hyde plus a 2023rd.
I take Samuels.
Okay, so again, these are lining up very, very well. And full disclosure to the listeners, Mitch has not seen these trades. As I stated for the first few Jordan Howard ones, you had to ask if it was actually a real trade.
Yeah, some of these I actually wonder how many trades that we miss out on just because we don't, like, I will never send out a 2024 for a player just because I assume the person's not going to even respond to it. But maybe I need to do it a little bit more.
I think based on these, maybe not that low, but we should be looking to make some of these moves. Now, let's transition here to wide receivers. You have one wide receiver.
I do. Yeah, it's John Brown. And I think I talked about him a few weeks ago as someone to buy anyways. But he's averaging 8 targets a game. He fits Josh Allen's skill set perfectly. He doesn't have a game under 50 yards yet this season. So you don't have to worry about that floor that you kind of have to worry about with the John Brown types normally. And he has that touchdown upside each week. He could give you that week winning upside. And I'm more than happy to go out and buy John Brown for all of my teams.
Now, he's going to be a little bit more expensive, and you'll see here based on the trades that went through. The first one here, a 2021 first. Now, this was tough because I couldn't find a lot of one-for-one trades, but it was a 2021 first for John Brown plus Golden Tate.
Oh, yeah, I do that for John Brown Tate.
Would you do it just for John Brown?
No.
Okay, so you need the additional upside there. Because, heck, you might even be able to flip a Golden Tate for a 2022nd later in the season.
Exactly. And I mean, he's going to be around for a few more years. His skill set isn't going to be one to where he's just going to be one and done. So if you're giving up a 2021 first, I want to make sure those players are actually playing in 2021.
Right. And those are 2 assets that you can count on for at least a few more seasons. D.D. Westbrook plus 2 2024ths.
Oh, John Brown. Yeah, I'd hammer that.
I agree with that. Even after what we saw in week 5, D.D. Westbrook had a solid game. But so we touched on a few running backs that you should be looking to buy if you're a contender that are going to be reasonably priced. We hit on John Brown, and you have one tight end here.
I do, and I just want to bring up with tight ends is I think this is the way to differentiate yourself from the other contenders. Dan brought it up on the Sit Start show, but starting 2 tight ends is actually a really good idea. And right now, there's only 6 or 7 tight ends that you could count on a weekly basis. It's Kelsey, it's Ertz, it's Kittle, Ingram, Hooper, Andrews, and Waller. And I think the only guy that has a good shot to stick around with those guys is Will Dissly. In the last 4 games, he has 24 targets and 5 red zone targets. And I just think he's going to be the cheapest tight end that you could get that can compete with those guys in the playoffs.
When I look at my teams, whether it's mainly Dynasty, because redraft, I've been very vocal on Twitter and even to you and league mates. I hate the way that my teams look from a redraft perspective whenever I went tight end early. So if I went Kelsey, Ertz, Kittle, and I took them where they had to go, I hate the way that my team ended up looking because these other tight ends, you get so much later. But my Dynasty teams, the ones that I like the most have strong tight end play. And you hit the nail on the head. You couldn't have said it any better. That's how you differentiate your team from other contenders, because there's a big advantage to have a reliable tight end than having to throw in, even though it's a guy that we liked in the offseason, like a Vance McDonald, who might go out there and put up 2 or 3 points for you.
Yeah, I think someone had a stat on Twitter. Only 6 or 7 tight ends scored over 10 PPR points this week. You just can't gamble that in the playoffs because most of the guys you're going to be going against probably already have Kittle or Ingram or Andrews. And if you're walking in there with, Tyler Eifert, you're just at a disadvantage based off that. So if I'm a contending team, I'm going to go out and make sure I could get a good tight end.
Will Dissly, and Darren Waller are probably 2 guys that could be league winners if they keep getting the usage that they got. And before we get on to the actual trades that went through in the last week involving Will Dissly, do you know who was tight end 9 over the last 2 weeks?
Tight end 9 over the last 2. I have no idea.
Foster Moreau.
Oh, yep.
And
that's right. Because he just got those touchdowns both weeks, right?
Yeah, I have him stashed away, and it's almost 20 Dynasty leagues, and I have been talking about him since May. And if he gets on a little hot streak here and he continues this, people are going to hear me talking about him a lot more. But we'll get to that whenever the time comes. But I did have to drop his name in there. So back to Will Dissly trades. And let's assume they're all just PPR, not tight end premium. I don't know if they are tight end premium, but based on the trades that went through, I have to assume they weren't. So first up, a 2020 third plus a 2021 second for Will Dissly.
I'd rather have Will Dissly.
2020 second for Will Dissly.
Will Dissly.
Kyle Rudolph plus 2020 second plus 2020 third or Will Dissly.
Dissly.
Now, this one was interesting because it's a running back that you really like. Leonard Fournette or Dissly plus a 2020 first plus a 2020 third.
Oh, give me Fournette. I love Fournette, man.
Even with the 2020 first. And then again, we don't know if it's early or late, but.
Yeah, because getting guys that, even though Fournette's not getting the touchdowns, he's still getting some of the most work in the league. I think he's still a top 3 back as far as workload goes. And those situations you just can't fall into a lot. So give me Fournette because I don't think he's leaving Jacksonville anytime soon after how good of a year he's had so far.
Now, does that change at all if, I know we're looking at this from a contender perspective, does it change at all if you're in a rebuild?
If I was rebuilding, I probably just wouldn't target Dissly. I would try to get that first, but I would rather have someone else besides Dissly.
Okay, I think that's a really good point. No, yeah. It does. It absolutely does. And then the next one, the last one here, Mecole Hardman plus Josh Oliver or Will Dissly.
Will Dissly.
Yeah, we've talked about this, and it's one of the reasons that I'm very worried about Damian Williams. And I don't know if you saw my tweet earlier today. I waved the white flag, for the time being at least, and admitting publicly for the first time that I was wrong on Damian Williams. But that's one of the reasons that I am worried about him and everybody in that offense, quite frankly. It's going to be a different guy that pops every single week. And actually, this is a really great segue. So those are the guys that we should be targeting if we're a contender. And you saw the prices, guys. They're very reasonable. So let's talk about a few guys that you're actually okay selling if you're a contender. And we just talked about Mecole Hardman. You wanted to talk about Tyreek Hill.
I did, yeah. So a big thing to remember is when you're trying to sell to a rebuild team, they either want draft picks or wide receivers. And very rarely can you trade a running back to them, just because that's what we've been told forever when we do Dynasty is you build off wide receivers and draft picks. But Tyreek Hill, he's someone to where if you're already contending, you really don't need his points at this point. And Mahomes just throws the ball to everyone. So in the last 3 weeks, they've had a different wide receiver lead the team in targets. It's been Watkins, Robinson, and Pringle. So it's not even they're attacking the same position. Mahomes is just throwing to whoever's open. And I mean, that's not including Kelsey and the running backs at that point too. And so Hill is still, I think he's a top 7 wide receiver in Dynasty, maybe top 8. And I think he's still young enough. And he just got that contract to where, you know, he had the issues during the summer, but I think he still has a high enough trade value to where you could get a really good piece for him on a contender. And you don't have to deal with those 6 and 7 point weeks, even though you're going to miss out on those 35-point weeks that he's going to have as well.
Right. And we talked about all the different weapons and Patrick Mahomes just finding the open guy. If you were able to hold on to Tyreek Hill up to this point, you know, week 5 of the regular season, and you're sitting at 5-0, 4-1, 3-2, you're able to sell him now most likely at close to his full value from what we previously saw. So you're talking about him as a wide receiver 7 in Dynasty. I think a lot of people see him that way. And this was really difficult. So I went through and I tried to find some trades involving Tyreek Hill. There were very few that involved moving him for a piece for a contender, but I did find a couple. So first up, Tyreek Hill or Nick Chubb?
Oh, Nick Chubb.
Tyreek Hill or Todd Gurley?
Tyreek Hill.
All right. So even though you might be in need of a running back, Gurley's a little too risky for you.
Yeah, he's gotten the touchdowns of the last few weeks, and I think he's always going to have that upside, but I don't think he has a game with over 60 yards rushing yet.
And I will say, if you acquire Todd Gurley right now, you should be prepared to just hang on to him and ride it out.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point.
The next one, bringing up your boy again, Tyreek Hill or Leonard Fournette plus a 2020 first.
Oh, Fournette.
I like that, yeah, because it's something that if you're a contender, Fournette is contributing on a weekly basis, whereas Tyreek Hill, he most likely in that offense, he's going to disappear. I don't want to say regularly, but there are going to be a few bust weeks. And then you're adding a 2020 first. Again, we don't know if it's late or early, but I also like the Fournette side there. And then last one, and again, it was kind of tough finding Tyreek Hill trades where you're a contender, but Tyreek Hill or Marlon Mack plus Terry McLaurin plus a 2020 second.
Marlon Mack and McLaurin.
Yeah, I like that. What we've seen from Terry McLaurin, he's probably going to give you a better floor on a weekly basis, and you're adding a back-end running back 1 plus the second. You have a running back here, and it's somebody we actually, in a co-owned league, were able to sell before the season, and his value has dropped significantly since then. David Montgomery.
Yeah, thank God we sold him. I think the big thing is the Bears don't have a very good offense. When you have a running back that's already splitting work in a not very good offense, you're going to be in trouble. He hasn't ran for 70 yards yet in the game. In 5 games, he has a total of 13 targets, which is 33rd in the league just for running backs. But the good news about him is if you're contending and you have him on your team, he's young enough to where a rebuild is going to want to buy him and hope that he's better in future years going forward once, you know, Mike Davis goes away, and hopefully they just let Montgomery run at some point. But as a contending team, I don't think you could start him at all. I mean, I would much rather start a James White over David Montgomery every single week. In the only Devy league that I'm in, and you're in that league as well with me, I'm 5-0. You know, not to toot my own horn, but toot too. And I have David Montgomery. So I actually put out, like I said, I updated my trade bait. I took the screenshot. I sent it in the group me message that he's on the block. So I'm going to be very interested to see what I'm able to get for him. Speaking of trades, we have a few trades lined up here that actually took place. David Montgomery plus a 2020 first or Marlon Mack. Oh, that's too much for Mack, I think. I thought you'd be able to get Mack just for Montgomery or pretty close to it. So I'll take the Montgomery side on that.
I love Marlon Mack, and I completely agree with you on David Montgomery. I don't want him if I'm a contender, but that was absolutely way too much. But I saw that trade, and I had to include it in our notes here. Next up, and it actually includes a tight end that we talked about earlier, David Montgomery plus Will Dissly for James Conner.
James Conner. Even though I hate to say it.
The only situation I wouldn't do that if it's tight end premium or my running backs, if I have some depth and I'm hurting at tight end. If I'm a true contender, I'm going to want to shore up that spot. So I would probably take Montgomery plus Dissly, but I wouldn't blame somebody for going James Conner, even though his usage, especially in week 5, was a little worrisome. And then this last one, again, you're a contender, David Montgomery or Sony Michel plus Julian Edelman. Somebody hates the Patriots here.
Yeah, I'll take Edelman, Michel in a heartbeat.
Would you, if you need a wide receiver, would you take Edelman alone, or is that too selling out for now for you?
If I was already, 5-0, 4-1, had a lot of points for, and Edelman was just going to push me over the top, I'd do it. I mean, It's pretty much trading a first round pick for Edelman, which is a lot, but Edelman just provides you such a safe floor each week, and you plug him in, you don't worry about it at all, that he just becomes an instant starter for you. And having that really nice when it comes to playoffs, and you just don't have to worry about taking him out of your lineup.
Right. And speaking of just Julian Edelman, in one of our co-owned leagues, you and I, we actually just bought him for a 2021 second, and I was ecstatic with that price.
Oh, I was really happy. We had to pay for that year too, but I was more than happy to do it.
Yeah, I wasn't complaining at all. And we have one more wide receiver that you want to talk about. And it's surprising because this is a guy that a lot of people, they see him as a guy that you can rebuild with, or if you're win now, somebody that you can plug into your lineup.
Yeah, my problem, it's Brandon Cooks. And my problem with him is nothing to do with the talent. I actually think he's a top 15 dynasty wide receiver, probably top 20 for sure. But the problem is he already has 3 games with 3 catches or less, and they've only played 5 games so far. He just gives you such a low floor right now. And what we're seeing out of Cooper Kupp, he is going to be getting a lot of the work, and Robert Woods he's just getting targeted more than what Brandon Cooks is right now. So Brandon Cooks is going to get you those boom weeks, kind of like what Tyreek Hill did. But Cooks is also going to give you those weeks to where you get 5 and 6 points. And if you get that week 14 and week 15, you'll lose the first week of your playoffs, no matter how good your team is.
Right. I like Brandon Cooks, but with the emergence of Cooper Kupp as not just, the 1A, the without a doubt one in that offense at this point, Brandon Cooks, he's definitely knocked down a few pegs in my book. So let's get right into the trades here. Brandon Cooks plus Robbie Anderson for Tyler Lockett plus a 2020 first.
Oh, Tyler Lockett.
I knew instantly when I saw that trade you were taking the Tyler Lockett side. And I like that whether I'm a contender or a rebuild. So give me the Lockett side as well.
Same.
Here's another one where it's somebody that you like. So Brandon Cooks or Christian Kirk plus a 2021 first.
Christian Kirk.
Brandon Cooks or Michael Gallup plus a 2020 first.
No, Brandon Cooks.
You would take Cooks there?
Yeah, because if I'm a contending team, I don't want to have to put Gallup in my lineup, because I don't think he's going to provide you more weekly upside than what Cooks is. So
I think he's going to give you a better floor.
Nah, I don't know, dude. I don't like that Cowboys offense all that much. I'm a hater.
I would smash accept Gallup in a 2020 first. And I honestly don't think in any league that I have Brandon Cooks, I don't think I could get a 2021 first by itself right now.
No, I think you could. But I was looking at this from if I'm contending and I need those weekly points each week.
I still think I would take Gallup with the first, I think.
You really would? See, that one's tough. I'd stick with Cooks. Because like I said, I still think Cooks is at least a top 20 dynasty wide receiver still.
Okay. And then Brandon Cooks plus Gus Edward. So I guess that was the big kicker here. Or James Conner.
James Conner.
If I need a running back, I will definitely take James Conner there. And I want to talk about something. So we're talking about all these draft picks and everything. And Mitch, I'm sure that you noticed the same thing. And it's more prevalent in leagues where we just had the startup prior to the 2019 season. But there's probably 2, 3, 4 teams that hoarded all the 2020 picks. So a lot of these trades, it's going to be very difficult to get done if you have one of those hoarders in your league, because it's especially like, let's say this is kind of arbitrary, but you're looking to move Julio Jones. You're not going to be able to move him, even though it's great. It's probably good value. Let's say a 2020 first plus a 2020 second, if it's a hoarder of picks.
That's such a good point because you're right. There's one in every league now. There wasn't as much last year, but this year, every single league has one. And so when you're going into week 5 and week 6, those teams have already given up on the year and they could care less. I mean, I have leagues like that to where I'm being offered trades for my first and I just reject them because I'm just waiting for that draft to come around in May. And like you were saying, it's you're just not going to be able to get trades done with those players. And so then when you're contending or a rebuild team, you're going to have to go and get players to find instead of just trading for draft picks.
Let me ask you a question. And this is just a thought that I just had. If you're in a league where you had the startup prior to the 2019 season and all the 2020 picks are being hoarded by a few people in your league, is it maybe wise to hold and try to start your rebuild beginning next year? As opposed to now when you might have to move assets for players that you're not absolutely in love with?
Yeah, that's a great point. You might just have to buy. There's some leagues to where I'm going to have to do this year. Is I thought I was going to be able to be a contender. Ends up 5 weeks in, I'm not able to. But there's already a team that has 4 or 5 2020 picks. And the other people that have their first round picks, they don't want to trade them. And so I'm just going to have to try to maybe get a little bit younger at a couple positions and not just do a full sell, try to get, 4 or 5 picks myself. I might just be able to only have my 4 picks going into next year, but maybe get a little bit younger at a couple positions instead.
Right. And I have a list here real quick that I want to hit on, kind of rapid fire, but it's guys that I would buy as a contender. But if I'm not contending, I am actively trying to move these players. So we talk about trying to move players for picks. In the situation we just discussed, that might be really difficult. So earlier I said if you go into the offseason with a certain player, shame on you if you're not contending. But you very well might have tried. And sometimes it just doesn't work out. But I have a list of players here, like I said, that I want to bring up. So here's a few names. If I'm a contender, I'm willing to buy. Let me preface this with, you really can only buy these guys from teams that are probably going to enter a rebuild. If a contender has these guys, it's going to be very difficult to acquire them. So I'm buying them if I'm a contender. I am trying my hardest to move them if I'm not a contender. But it's Devontae Freeman, Mark Ingram, Jordan Howard, Larry Fitzgerald, Julian Edelman, Alshon Jeffrey, John Brown, Mohamed Sanu. And if I'm a contender, and I actually think based on the last 2 weeks, you can get him at a discount, Emmanuel Sanders. I know that you were really high on him all throughout the offseason, and throughout the first couple weeks, it really paid off if you invested. He kind of busted out the last 2 weeks. So I think he's a good example of an aging veteran that if I'm a contender, if a rebuilding team has him, you can probably get him at a very reasonable price.
Yeah, and you bringing up Sanu's a really good guy. I didn't even consider him because I didn't notice that the Falcons are the highest pass to run ratio team in the league. They're at like 74 or 75%.
They have to with that defense. They have to.
Yeah, they don't even try to run the ball anymore. It's not even, we make fun of the Cardinals doing it, but the Falcons actually pass more. And that's a great point with Sanu because with Julio Jones being covered all the time, so as we saw last week, Sanu gets open and he gets those touchdowns.
Now, if I'm a contender and a rebuilding team has Mohamed Sanu, I would be shocked if it even took a 2022nd to get him.
Oh, yeah. That's one where you could send out a 2023rd and be like, hey, and I could see that getting accepted pretty quick.
Right. So that's actually, it's somebody that I should probably go out and target in some of my leagues that I am a contender, and maybe it's a 3 wide receiver league and I need some help there. But I think he's like wide receiver 25 over the last 2 weeks. So definitely something to keep your eye on moving forward, but a great buy low candidate. I don't even want to say buy low, a great buy if you're a contender. So before we sign off, week 6 look ahead. What's something that you're looking forward to the most, or what's the situation that you're keeping your eye on?
I was just going to say, just make sure you have an idea of what you want to do with each of your dynasty teams. And the funny thing is, when I started, everyone I talked to had like 1 or 2 or 3 teams. That was kind of the most. You heard a couple people that have like 10, and that would be a lot. But now the majority of the guys that I talk to have 20, 30, 40. But the big thing is just have an idea of what you need to do with each team and where each team needs players at what positions. I think it's really important to know that going into each week. But my biggest thing for week 6, man, is that Texas and Chiefs game. That game is going to be awesome.
That's going to be a lot of eyes on that game from a fantasy perspective. And I hope it's not like a dud, the Chiefs versus the Colts this week, because I thought that was going to be a really high scoring game and it disappointed a bit. But looking at week 6, for me, honestly, it kind of goes back to some of the veteran running backs that we just talked about. Carlos Hyde against the Chiefs, Mark Ingram against the Bengals, Devontae Freeman against the Cardinals, and then looking at some of the other guys, Sony Michel against the Giants on Thursday night, and then maybe a last chance here, Damian Williams against the Texans in that game that you just talked about. That Texans team, they give up a lot of receptions to running backs, and we saw it against Atlanta with Devontae Freeman and Ito Smith. I think it continues. So just things to look at. If you have these running backs, that might be the time to move them if you're not a contender. But prior to this week, maybe that's a perfect time to buy these guys. And we talk about rebuilds and what we should be looking at when we should be making certain moves. Some rebuilds, they're going to take some time depending on your league. I have one league. It's a 14-team Superflex league, and I drafted Andrew Luck in the first round. Well, he retired, and instantly I'm behind the 8 ball. It's not a knock on the league, but it's not the most active of leagues. So a rebuild is not going to happen overnight. You have to be patient. You have to make your moves at very opportune times. So just keep that in mind. Some rebuilds, they might work just like that. Some you're going to have to put some time into. Mitch, any other thoughts here for our listeners? There was a lot in this episode, and we kind of went off on some tangents, but I think overall, top to bottom, really good information. Rebuild versus contender.
Yeah, I think we covered everything really good. Just make sure you don't sell out your whole team in order to try to win a championship.
And we've all done that, at least in one spot, and then it doesn't pan out, and then you have to enter the rebuild sooner rather than later. And tonight we talked a lot about the players that we were buying as contenders or players that we might be willing to move as a contender. What do you think next week going the other way with that? We'll do kind of a week 6 recap, week 7 look ahead, but kind of dissect it from a rebuild mindset.
I like that a lot because there's a lot of players you could buy as a rebuild.
And I think that time after week 6, moving into week 7, you should have a better idea of what teams are rebuilds. And that's going to be the perfect opportunity and time to talk about that. As always, thank you so much for listening. I'm John Bauer. You can find me on Twitter at The Bauer Club. For Mitch Sorensen at DynoMC. Follow the show on Twitter at Superflexology. Have a great night.
Thank you for listening to the Superflexology podcast. If you want the latest news in fantasy football, follow us on Twitter at Superflexology, The Bauer Club, and DynoMC.